The stage is bright, almost blinding, as the cameras zoom in. Millions of people are watching from their homes, waiting for a moment they won't forget. The air in the studio is thick with tension. This isn't just another interview. It feels like a battle. The audience knows how these things usually go. A young, untested guest sits across from a ruthless host, and within minutes, they start to crumble under the pressure. They stutter, they hesitate, they say the wrong thing. And just like that, their image is destroyed. That's what they expect to happen tonight. They think Barron Trump is about to be picked apart, piece by piece. At the center of it all is Richard Caldwell, a man who has built his career on making powerful people uncomfortable. He's not just a journalist. He's an expert at getting inside someone's head. He's made senators sweat, CEOs stumble over their words, and presidential candidates regret ever stepping onto his stage. He has a reputation for tearing through polished answers and forcing the truth out, whether his guests are ready or not. And tonight, he has one goal: to break Barron Trump. Then Barron steps onto the stage. He's tall, confident, and completely calm. There's no nervous energy, no fidgeting, no darting eyes. He moves with purpose, his dark suit crisp and perfectly fitted. His presence alone is enough to shift the mood in the room. He's never been in a moment like this before, never sat across from someone like Richard. Yet he doesn't look the slightest bit worried. His name has been debated, criticized, and used as a weapon in political fights for years. But he has never spoken for himself. Until now. Richard watches him, smirking slightly, as if he already knows how this will end. The audience leans in, waiting for the first strike. They think they know what's coming. What they don't realize is that tonight, the one left standing at the end might not be who they expected. Richard leans in, his expression smooth, his voice steady. The world is curious, Barron. Who are you really? He says it lightly, almost like small talk, but everyone in the room knows better. It's not a real question. It's bait, the kind that makes guests second-guess themselves, stumble over their words, try too hard to prove something. The audience watches closely, waiting for the slightest sign of uncertainty. A pause too long, a flicker of hesitation, a shaky voice. But Barron doesn't bite. He doesn't shift in his chair, doesn't rush to fill the silence. He simply watches Richard for a moment, then responds. Maybe tonight, they'll find their own answer. His voice is calm, even, giving nothing away. It's not defiance, not arrogance, just controlled confidence. He refuses to let Richard control the narrative, refuses to let himself be defined by a single question. Richard smirks, but his eyes narrow slightly. That answer was too clean, too composed. He was hoping for something else, uncertainty, awkwardness, even overconfidence. But Barron gave him nothing to work with. Fine. Time to dig deeper. You were born into privilege, Richard says, his tone shifting just a little, sharpening at the edges. Has that ever felt like a burden? It's a smart move. If Barron agrees, he sounds weak, as if his success isn't his own. If he denies it, he risks looking out of touch, someone who doesn't understand the struggles of ordinary people. Either way, it's an easy headline. The audience knows it too. They hold their breath, waiting for the misstep. But Barron doesn't blink. Instead, he leans forward slightly, just enough to show he's fully engaged. Privilege is just a word people use to explain away success, he says. A name can open doors, but it doesn't walk you through them. A ripple runs through the crowd. Some nod in approval, others murmur quietly, processing what they just heard. Richard studies him, reassessing. That wasn't the answer he expected. It wasn't defensive, wasn't dismissive. It turned the question on its head, shifting the focus from what Barron was given to what he has done. Smart. Richard exhales, flipping to the next page of his notes. This is going to be harder than he thought. Richard leans in, his voice steady, but carrying more weight now. The warm-up is over. It's time to strike. Your father is one of the most divisive figures in history, he says, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. His eyes lock onto Barron's, watching for any crack in his composure. Have you ever been ashamed of anything he said or done? The room falls silent. It's the perfect trap. If Barron says yes, the media will tear apart his words, turning them into a betrayal. If he says no, he risks being labeled blind to controversy, unwilling to think for himself. The audience leans in, waiting for the moment they've seen play out in so many interviews before. The hesitation, the scrambling for the right words. But Barron doesn't hesitate. He tilts his head slightly, a small, almost amused smile appearing at the corner of his lips. His voice is calm, measured. Have you ever been ashamed of anything President Biden has said or done? The air shifts. A ripple runs through the crowd. A few people gasp. Others exchange glances, murmuring. Nobody expected that. In just one sentence, Barron flipped the question on its head. Now it's Richard who has to answer. For the first time tonight, the veteran host falters. It's brief, just a flicker of surprise in his expression, but it's there. He quickly regains his footing, clearing his throat. This isn't about me, Barron, he says smoothly, trying to push forward. But Barron doesn't let go that easily. His gaze sharpens, his voice steady. Isn't it? He asks. Why is it fair to question my loyalty, but not yours? The audience reacts instantly. Some chuckle, entertained by the way Barron has put Richard on the defensive. Others nod in quiet approval, recognizing the shift in power. Richard knows he's losing ground. He doesn't show it, but he feels it. His strategy isn't working the way he planned. He needs to adjust fast. Without missing a beat, he pivots, flipping to the next page in his notes. Time for a new approach. Richard doesn't waste time. He pivots sharply, flipping to one of the most divisive topics in modern politics. His voice is firm, calculated. Your father claimed the election was stolen, he says, watching Barron closely. Do you believe that? It's a dangerous question. No matter how Barron answers, the reaction will be explosive. If he says yes, he's immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist. If he says no, he risks angering his father's most loyal supporters. There's no easy way out. At least, that's what Richard is counting on. But Barron remains still, completely unfazed. He doesn't rush to answer. Instead, he lets the question sit in the air for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on the room. Then, in a voice calm but firm, he replies, the real question isn't what I believe. It's whether Americans believe in their system. And if half the country doesn't, maybe the issue isn't the belief. It's the system. The room reacts instantly. Some members of the audience break into applause. Others nod thoughtfully. Richard presses his lips together, gripping his notes a little tighter. That wasn't just an answer. It was a perfectly executed sidestep. Instead of playing into the trap, Barron redirected the conversation entirely. Richard exhales quietly. Fine. If politics isn't working, he'll try something bigger, something personal. He leans forward slightly, his voice shifting. If you had the chance, would you follow in your father's footsteps? He asks. Would you enter politics? It's a direct challenge. Everyone in the room knows the weight of this question. People have been speculating about Barron Trump's future for years. This is his moment to confirm or deny it, to give the world a headline they can run with. But Barron doesn't rush. He leans back slightly, as if carefully considering his next words. The tension builds. Then finally he speaks. The question isn't whether I want to, he says slowly. The question is whether America is ready for a new kind of leader. For a second there's silence. Then the room erupts. Applause breaks out, louder than before. Some audience members rise to their feet, clapping. Richard watches, knowing full well what just happened. Barron didn't just avoid the trap. He turned the moment into something bigger. And now the crowd is on his side. Richard knows the political angle isn't working. Barron is too controlled, too sharp with his answers. If he wants to break him, he needs to go deeper. He softens his tone, lowers his voice, and delivers a question designed to strike at the core of who Barron is. Have you ever felt like a failure? He asks. Not as a Trump, not as a public figure, just as yourself. It's not an attack on politics or privilege. It's personal. The kind of question that makes people pause, makes them reflect. If Barron hesitates, even for a second, Richard will seize on it. The audience waits, sensing that this moment could change everything. But Barron doesn't hesitate. He leans back slightly, eyes locked on Richard, studying him. Then, with the same steady calm he's had all night, he says, "Failure isn't losing. It's letting others decide your worth." The room shifts. A quiet murmur ripples through the audience. People glance at each other, processing the weight of those words. Barron didn't just answer the question. He turned it into something bigger, something everyone in the room could feel. Richard doesn't let it go. He pushes forward, his voice tightening. "Do you really know who you are?" he asks. "Or are you just a name, a product of media perception?" This is a direct hit. The entire interview has revolved around the Trump name, around expectations, around Barron's place in the world. If he stumbles here, even slightly, Richard wins. But Barron doesn't stumble. He leans forward just enough to close the space between them and delivers his final blow. "If I were just a name," he says, his voice unwavering, "why am I sitting here answering these questions myself?" For a moment, silence. Then the studio erupts. Applause, whispers, a few quiet chuckles of admiration. Richard blinks, caught off guard. He has no counter. Barron just ended this round on his own terms. Richard knows this is his last chance. He's tried politics, privilege, personal attacks. Nothing has rattled Barron. So now, he goes for the one question that could strip everything away. He leans in, his voice calm but edged with finality. "If you weren't a Trump," he asks, "would anyone be listening to you right now?" It's the ultimate challenge. Strip away the name, the legacy, the spotlight, what's left? If Barron admits the name gives him power, he looks like someone who only matters because of his father. If he denies it, he looks dishonest. Richard watches him closely, knowing this is his last shot at control. Barron exhales lightly, but there's no frustration, no hesitation. He looks Richard in the eye and delivers his final answer. "People listen because of the Trump name," he says. "But if I had nothing worth saying, would they still be listening now?" The room is silent for half a second, then it erupts. Some people clap, others rise to their feet. Even those who walked in as skeptics are nodding now. Richard leans back, his expression unreadable. But he knows it. Everyone knows it. Barron didn't just survive this interview. He owned it. Richard exhales, leaning back in his chair. For the first time tonight, he isn't trying to gain control. He isn't searching for another angle, another trap. Instead, he gives a small nod, a hint of something almost like respect in his eyes. "No matter what people think about the Trump name," he says, his voice quieter now, "I think we can all agree. You are not just another politician's son." Barron holds his gaze for a moment, then gives a simple, knowing nod. A small smile forms, not triumphant, not arrogant, just calm. "Thank you," he says. The cameras keep rolling, the studio still humming with the energy of what just happened. But the battle is over. The interview may have ended, but its impact will stretch far beyond tonight. The screen fades slightly, but the conversation isn't over. The audience has witnessed something rare, an interview that didn't go as planned, a guest who refused to be cornered. Now, the question turns to them. "What do you think?" the narrator asks. "Did Barron outplay Richard? How would you have answered in his place?" The discussion doesn't end when the cameras shut off. It continues in the comments, in debates, in conversations long after this moment. If this interview made you think, if it challenged your perspective, hit the like button, subscribe, and join the conversation. The story isn't over. It's just beginning.